Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I appreciate you watching. This week we're starting a new 2-week module about JavaScript. So we'll be working in JavaScript this week and next week. And this is still extending the stuff that we've been working on for the last several weeks of class as we've been working on our website project for our big lab. So we did, 2 different weeks of HTML, 2 different weeks of CSS, and now it's one module of JavaScript, but we're doing it across 2 weeks. And so as we're getting started here, I think it's important to talk about just exactly how we'll be using JavaScript. And I like to teach JavaScript at this level as what I like to call a functional primer. A lot of people, when they are teaching JavaScript, at the beginner level, will do everything in the console, which would be similar to the way that we used Python when we were working with Python, about 6 weeks ago now, or however long ago it's been, 4 or 5 weeks ago, however long ago it's been, where you just have a text-based console and you're able to put things in there and get results out and work with things that way. Right, but I don't necessarily like working with JavaScript that way when it comes to web development, because we don't work with JavaScript in web development in that sort of way. Right, we work with JavaScript in context on a website. And so when we work with JavaScript in context on a website, that means we're actually adding functionality to websites. So over this week and next week, we'll be doing some different things to add some JavaScript to the website. And JavaScript allows us to add a bit of interactivity to our website. So we'll spend a lot of time practicing code, working on examples, doing some different things. But even still, we'll only be scratching the surface at what JavaScript can do. Right, we're basically just doing a little bit in this class, and in the spring class, for those of you who are in the programming and web development program, we'll do a little bit more. And then in the advanced level class, we basically do a lot of JavaScript in that class. That is sort of my advanced level JavaScript class. Do a ton of JavaScript in there. I really like JavaScript. One of the things that I always like to say is that I really like JavaScript, although I don't know that JavaScript likes me back. Right? I think my relationship with JavaScript is very one-sided. JavaScript has some quirks in it, and it's some of the things that we talk about in the advanced level class, where we have some of the things that are, quirky about JavaScript that cause us some issues. But for our purposes, where we're just getting started here doing some of the most basic things, it's no big deal whatsoever. All right, so we're just going to be scratching the surface of what we can do with JavaScript, just doing some very basic, very simple stuff. So what exactly is JavaScript? JavaScript is client-side scripting that allows us to create dynamic websites, right? And so when we say dynamic here, what we mean is interactive. Right? It gives us the ability to interact with a website. And so up until this point, right, we've been working with a website with HTML, with CSS, so we're able to add text to a website. We're able to add multimedia to a website, images, audio, video, right? We're able to take that website, we're able to make it look nice, we're able to take things and move them around, and we're able to make things different colors. But one thing that we haven't been able to do thus far is we haven't been able to allow our user to do anything interactive with our website. And aside from click a link, right? The link really is the only thing that we've really been able to do with our websites thus far that has been interactive. And it's not even that interactive, right? Like, it just kind of takes us from one website to another website. So we can use code, and when we're using JavaScript, we are using code, right? So it is going to be a little bit different, again, from HTML and CSS, whereas HTML and CSS were a lot friendlier to us, right? We could make small mistakes in HTML and CSS, and things would still show up on our screen, and things would still work properly. In JavaScript, if we make small mistakes, things will no longer work, right? When we're thinking of JavaScript, JavaScript is going to be more closely related to Python, right? And if you'll remember back to when we were working with Python, if you made small mistakes, if you made something lowercase when it was supposed to be uppercase, then all of a sudden your program wouldn't work, right? And so the same thing applies now that we are working with JavaScript. So we want to be mindful, we want to pay attention to what we're doing, we want to be sure that we're working with the right things as we are working with them. And so when we say dynamic, we're making our websites interactive. We're able to insert dynamic text into an HTML page, right? So for example, we're able to take somebody's name and put it onto a page. Maybe we'll do an example of how we can do that today. We can react to an event. We'll talk more about what an event is in a little bit. We can get information about a user's computer. For example, what type of browser they're using or different things, right? And again, this is not a safety and security issue at this level when we're looking at, information about a user's computer, because this is all client side. This is all front end, right? So this is just collecting information on the user's computer about the user's computer that's only going to be used on that user's computer. Right? So if we're not sending it back to any sort of server or doing anything else with it, we're not really compromising any sort of safety and security issues there. So we can kind of breathe a sigh of relief there, if you will. We can also perform calculations on a user's computer. We can make simple calculators, which is something that we do, in future classes, or, we can do form validation, which is another thing that we do in future classes, various other different types of things that we can do in performing these calculations. So what are the benefits of JavaScript? One is usability, right? So we can modify a page without having to post back to the server, which allows us to have a faster UI. Right? Not everything that you see on a website requires a call to a server for it to be done. Right? If it's just a simple change, a simple update, we don't need to, if it's not information that we're going to be keeping, or if it's not some kind of complex calculation or some kind of really, advanced thing, there's no need to do any sort of, server calls there. So we can just do the work on the user's computer with something like JavaScript, and it's going to be faster. It's also going to be more efficient. Right, so we're not tying up resources on our end, since the user is going to be closer to the resources. It's going to be more manageable. It's going to be easier to do, and it's going to be event driven, right? So it's going to be responsive to things like user actions, clicks, and key presses specifically, right? Which is what we're talking about when we say an event. Right, when we think event, and events are something that we talk about as we progress throughout JavaScript. JavaScript is an event-driven language. is something that we say about JavaScript. And the more we kind of go through JavaScript in future classes, we kind of go deeper and deeper into the ideas of events and things of that nature, right? Like when we get to the advanced class, we talk about the idea of propagation and bubbling and all these sorts of fancy terms that we definitely don't have to worry about now. Right, for the time being, what we want to know about an event is any sort of action that the user can do. Right, so they can click on something, they can press a key on their keyboard, they can tap on the screen, they can wait for a certain amount of time to pass. Right, that's an event. And what our JavaScript can do is our JavaScript can listen out for some of these things to happen. And our JavaScript can do something when these things happen. And so just as important as talking about, what JavaScript is and the benefits of JavaScript, I think it's important to talk about what JavaScript is not. And I think one of the things that people get kind of confused about a lot of times is they get confused relating JavaScript to Java. Right, and these are two very similar names, and I can understand why you'd be confused. But they are not the same thing. They are very similar in a lot of respects. But especially the deeper we get into the programming languages, you find that they are very, very, very different. And actually, once you look under the hood, you realize that JavaScript's not related to Java at all. In fact, JavaScript wasn't even originally called JavaScript. When JavaScript was created by Brendan Eich, back when he was working as a programmer for Netscape, it was called LiveScript. But when he presented his new programming language to his managers at Netscape, they wanted to find a way to get people to use it. And so they said, well, what if we relate it to this hot new programming language? And, we're talking about we're in 94, 95, right? If you remember back when we were talking about the history of the internet, Java came about in 91. Right, so Java hit the scene in the early 90s. By the time the mid 90s came around, Java was the big hot programming language everybody was wanting to learn and work with. And so since Java was the hot new programming language at the time, the management at Netscape said, well, what if we named this something similar? Right, so people can relate it to their love for Java, and maybe they'll want to use it. Right, so that's where the name JavaScript came from. It was basically just done for marketing purposes. Kind of clickbaity. Right, so when we get into the idea of Java versus JavaScript, JavaScript is interpreted versus Java being compiled. We talk more about what that means in advanced classes, right? JavaScript has less syntactical rules, loose data types, things of that nature. Right, we don't really have to worry about a lot of this at this level. But I just wanted to show you all here that there are several different reasons why Java and JavaScript are not the same. So we've mentioned this already. JavaScript programs wait for user actions called events and respond to them. So event-driven programming. We write programs driven by user events. So we have some sort of event. And so let's write a page with a clickable button that pops up a little window that says, Hello World. Right, so let's get into a replit that does this here for us. Now, before we write this program. Let's talk about what we can keep and what we can delete out of this replit again. Right, we're going to keep this link here. We're going to keep this line 8, this link, href here. That's good. That can stay. This hello world here on line 12, that can go. This script source equals javascript.js. We need to keep that. That needs to stay. That is what links this HTML file to this script.js file. If you don't have that, these two files won't be linked to one another, so they won't be able to talk to one another. This HTML file won't know it exists. So you need to keep that where it's at. This other script down here, however, you can get rid of that if you want to. But you need to make sure that you keep the script.js file in here. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to create a button. And we're going to use an HTML5 button to do this. Button. And we're going to say, just something like click me. Right, so we have two button tags here, an opening button tag and a closing button tag. And that's all we need to do to create a button. In future classes, we talk about a button in terms of being part of a form. We actually have to, in these instances, we might want to add a type equals button to them. But since we're not working with an entire form here, since we're just working with a button, so we can have a clickable object, then we can just have that there. And run that. We can see we have a nice clickable button here. And I can click it right now, but it's not going to do anything. Right, and just so we can kind of get ourselves some practice here, I can go into the style.css here. I can, focus that button element selector. And I can change, like, the width. I can make the button wider. I can make it 300 pixels high. I can make it taller. Maybe I want to make it 100 pixels tall. Maybe I want to take my font size and make it, maybe 36 pixels. Let's see what that button looks like. Nice big button there, right? Nobody's going to miss that button. And another thing that I like to do with these buttons is I like to do with these when we're working with JavaScript here is I like to pop them out into a new tab. Just so I can have the output window in a new tab. So there's this open in a new tab button here in the upper right hand corner. I like to pop them out into a new tab so it's just the website on the tab. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to go over here to the JavaScript file. And we're going to work together here and we're going to write our very first JavaScript program. And we're going to do that with a function. Right, so you might remember back to when we were doing the programmatic thinking module. We mentioned the idea of a function. And we said a function is a block of code that does a specific thing. So a function is a block of code that does a specific thing. So what I want to do is I want to write a function. I want to put all of the lines of code that I need to have to do a specific thing inside of that function. And then I need to tie that function to an event on whatever item I want to tie it to. So in JavaScript, we start out with our function by writing the keyword function. Easy enough, right? If we're going to write a function, we started out with the keyword function. And this will be, say, hello. Right? We can write our function keyword, or we can name our function whatever we want. The only thing we need to remember is, one, we can't start it with a number. Right? We kind of talked about that before when we talked about variables with Python. Right? Whenever any kind of programming language sees a number at the start of something, it thinks, oh boy, it's time to do math. So if you start it with a number, it's going to see that number and it's going to think, oh boy, it's time to do math, and then it's going to see a bunch of things that aren't math, and it's going to get mad at you. The other thing that you need to make it a function is you need this set of parentheses right here. This set of parentheses for our purposes, we're going to leave them empty. But in the future, when we get more advanced, they actually hold something called parameters. Right? And a parameter is kind of like a variable that is just specific for a function. And when I talk about parameters for a function, I like to think about it like if you've ever been to the bank. Right? If you've ever been to the bank and you've seen, you've gone to the drive-thru of the bank and you've seen those pneumatic tubes that allow you to take something that's outside of the bank and send it into the bank. That's the way a parameter works. So if I use a parameter in a function, that allows me to take some piece of data outside of a function, and I can pass it through a parameter that allows me to bring it inside of the function. And so for our purposes, we're not going to be using parameters, so we're just going to leave these parentheses empty here. But just know that, especially if you're looking at other things that you Google or whatever, there could be something in here. Right, maybe we'll even do an example with them. You know what, let's even just do an example with them. I'm going to put var greeting here. And I actually don't think I have to put var. I can just put greeting. I'm going to put greeting here. And then I'm going to put my curly braces. Curly braces. And so these curly braces, if you think about it like we thought about CSS, right? We said our curly braces define our declaration block in CSS. In JavaScript, these curly braces define the area of my function. So all the code that belongs to my function goes between these curly braces. So all the code that I need to be able to do whatever it is I need to do with this function goes between these two curly braces. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pop up a little window. And we are going to have it say hello world. Now in this case, we're using the parameter greeting, which is going to allow us to take data from outside of our function and pass it into our function. So what we're going to do here is, it's actually fairly simple to pop up a little alert window. In JavaScript, we are going to use the alert function. And we are going to put in the term greeting in there because that's the name of our parameter, right? Greeting here. It's our variable. And that's our function. Right, but you see, when we write a function, that's only half of what we do with a function. It's not enough to just write a function. We also have to invoke a function. And so one of the things that I could do is I could just put a call to the function inside of my JavaScript file, which would just be typing the name of the function, which would be say hello, adding the parentheses, and then in between that putting whatever data that I want to pass as my parameter. In this case, maybe something like hi. Right, and you can see here I'm using a semicolon at the end of all of my lines, just like we did in CSS. Right, we use a semicolon at the end of all of our lines here, just like the period at the end of our sentence. And so when this occurs, the event that it's going to be waiting on here is for this file to finish loading. When our JavaScript loads and it gets to this function invocation here, it'll say, oh yeah, I know that function. I'm going to run that function. It's going to see, okay, greeting parameter. What does it have as the data that it's passing in as the parameter? Okay, it has the word hi. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to take that word hi. I'm going to put it in that pneumatic cylinder and I'm going to pass it into the bank, right? So I'm going to take that word hi and I'm going to put it in here as the word greeting. So that would just be like saying, okay, hi, right here. So if we were to run this, this would actually give us a little pop-up window that says hi. And let me zoom in on that just in case you can't see it. Hi. There it is. Right, and that's kind of why I like to do it in the big window here too, because it's a little more clear. Right, we can see hi. And you know, sometimes you want things to happen when your page loads. Right, you can see in the background here the button hasn't loaded yet. The page hasn't finished loading yet. And it doesn't finish loading until you click OK. But that's not necessarily what we want to do here. We want to wait until this happens on an event. So what I want to do is I want to take and I want to remove this out of here. And I want to go back to my HTML. And I want to find my button. Oh, excuse me, I want to find my button. I want to find the opening tag of my button. And inside of this opening tag of my button, I want to put the event that I want to listen out for. So whatever event that I want to happen to this button. So in this case, it's going to be on click. And I want to set that equal to the function that I want to run when this button is clicked. And we put that in quotes. So that's say hello. And we have to put our parameter in there. So that is say hello. Actually, I don't think I would put that in quotes. Say hello. Hello world. And I do put this in quotes. What am I thinking? Yes, this goes in quotes. Say hello, hello world. So now whenever my button is clicked, it'll run that hello world function, or that say hello function. This time it's going to take hello world out of here, the parameter, as the greeting parameter. And it's going to pass it into my function, right? Pneumatic tube going into the bank. So we can run this now. See, everything's good. We can go over here. Now when I click this button, we get hello world, right? We can see that there, hello world. We'll zoom right in. We'll see it says hello world. Okay. right? And since it's listening for that event before it does the hello world, it goes ahead and it loads everything before everything happens. So that's all well and good, right? Pretty easy. Pretty nice that we can do that. So let's take it up a notch. Let's talk about a few more things here, and let's do ourselves another example. And that'll be how we wrap it up today. Because it's nice that we can kind of pop up that box there that says hello world. But what else can we do? Right? Because when we're working with JavaScript, what JavaScript does is JavaScript manipulates the elements on our HTML page. And it manipulates the elements by manipulating the DOM, or the document object model. Right? So just because we're working with another format of language, we don't get away from that idea of DOM, or document object model, right? That's still here to kind of plague our existence. So we're still having to deal with that. But we can check an element state, right? We can see whether or not a box is checked, which is a fun thing. We can insert some text into a div, which is something that we'll do in just a moment. Or we can change styles. We can take something that is one color and change it and make it a completely different color. Pretty easy, right? Well, we'll see. So one thing that we want to do is we want to be able to access elements. And there are two basic elements, or two basic methods in which we can use to access elements within our DOM. And we are going to focus on this one. Although, honestly, I think this one's easier. So you know what? Let's just do query selector. So let's forget about get element by ID. Let's do query selector instead, because I think query selector is easier. There are two basic methods in which we can access elements within our DOM. I think query selector is easier, so we're going to use query selector for our purposes here. Document.querySelector. Now, what is document? Document is the root of our DOM. So what we're saying here when we're saying document is we're saying go to the root of our DOM. And then when we're saying query selector, or we're saying get element by ID, we're saying look through the entire DOM for this thing. So for example, one of the things that we can do is change text. And I just have element here, and when I have element here, think of that as document.querySelector, whatever. Right, and then we have inner HTML. And this allows us to change or to add text in another element on our page. So what I'd like for us to do, and by the time we get done with this, it'll probably be about wrapping up point, or it'll probably be a good time for a wrapping up point, because I think if I look at our slides, we are exactly halfway through. And in this particular class, we do not do all the slides that are in my slide deck. So what I want to do is I want to make another button. Right, one of the things that's important as well is I always want to make sure that this JavaScript here is at the bottom, that it's right above my /body. So everything that I put over top of it, I want to put above it. right? Because I want this thing here to be the thing that runs last. So I want to put a button here, another button. We'll come back and add the reference here a little later to our event, but I will put this as a we'll just call this add text. That's what we'll put as this button, and that'll create us another big button here, right? And since that's inline, let's make these block level elements. So we'll say display block. We'll add a little display block here to our CSS, and let's add a little margin bottom, 12 pixels. Right, so that'll just put one on top of the other and set it a little bit downward. And let's put an H1 here. Now, what am I going to put in? Now, what kind of text am I going to put inside of that H1? Nothing. I'm not going to put any text inside of that H1. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do something similar to what we did with our say hello here. Except this time we're going to ask the user for their name. And then we're going to insert their name inside of this H1. And I'm going to give this H1 a class of hi, right? Hi. So in my CSS, we would have a .hi here. And we could make it like, so let's say color. What kind of color do we want to make this? Let's make it a nice, let's see. It's fall. It's Thanksgiving season. Let's go brown. So that's going to be like a dark orange. So let's go for something like 703500. Right, just for a nice dark brown. And let's give it a nice big font size. 48 pixels. Let's give it a font weight of bold. Let's give it a text align center. And let's give it a font family sans serif. Right, just some of the stuff that we did from the last module, just so we can get some of that practice in here. Right, now, there's no text in there yet, right? So there's no... We can't see anything. Although if we wanted to test it out, we could just write something like testing in there. We could click run here, and we could just see there's testing on the screen. Dark brown. Looks pretty good. That's what we were going for. So let's write our function. So we're going to write another function, and we're going to call this function maybe greet user, right? And we're going to add another set of parentheses there. This set of parentheses will be empty, right? We won't use a parameter here, and we'll add our curly braces here just to define the block for our function. Now, what I want to do here is I want to declare a variable because I want to use a prompt box for this. And in order to use a prompt box, I need to use a variable to store the value that I get back. So in JavaScript, there are two ways to declare a variable. If you remember back to when we were talking about Python, we talked about variables in Python, and we talked about variables as being basically like a shoebox or a bag or a jar, right? Something that we can put data into, take data out of. Right? And we need a keyword to declare a variable in Python. or in JavaScript, whereas we didn't need a keyword to declare a variable in Python. And there are two basic keywords in JavaScript that we can use to declare a variable. They are let and var. And for our purposes at this point in time, the differences really don't matter, so we're just going to use var. Right? VAR, short for variable. Right? If you care, let creates a variable that's scoped for a particular function or data structure, while var creates a variable that's scoped for the entire program. Globally scoped. Right? Before where we're at, we don't really have to worry about that. And so we can just add a variable here, var username equals prompt, and in quotes, what is your name? Question mark. Now, that might look a little bit familiar to you. That might remind you of when we were using Python and we were using the input function to get the input from a user. It works in basically the same way, although we put it in a box that looks similar to the alert box. Right, so since we haven't done HTML forms yet, the more conventional way would be to use an HTML form to be able to get data from your user, process the data from your form. So since we haven't done that in this class, we'll use a prompt box, get the data from our user that way, and we'll put it in something else here. Now, so we can do this testing, let's do this testing just a little bit different. Let's go ahead and let's log this to the console. I'm going to add console.log user name right here. That's the name of that variable. And let's go back to our HTML file, and let's go ahead and in our button here, we'll add our event on click equals greet user parentheses. Right, so now we can go over here, we can click add text, and it pops up that box there, and it says, what is your name? Right, and it gives me a little box to add in, what is my name? And I can type in Mr. Ramsey, and I can click OK. But what did it do with that data? Well, we're doing something with it because we're logging it to the console. And console.log in general, especially with where we're at, it's a useful tool that we can use for debugging. That's actually in our inspect element tool. So if I look at my inspect element tool here, we'll right click and we'll select inspect element. We can see here I have a console. And so when I use console log, I am logging to the console. So if I click this console tag here, I can see there's Mr. Ramsey, right? There's the name there that's been logged to the console. And if I do this again, I can just add other names here, and it'll log it to the console. And this just proves that my function is working. Right, so this is a good thing that we can use to kind of do some testing and work some things out. So now that I know that that's working, I can delete that console.log line because I know that that's working and that's sending it out. And so what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to take that text and I want to be able to put it in this H1 here. So the first thing I want to be able to do is select this H1. So first thing I do is I go to document, right? Because document is the root. So that's basically saying go to the root of the DOM, dot query, uppercase S in selector. And then the selector that we query is the same way that we would query it in CSS. Right? So since I have a class of hi here, I can enter in dot .hi in quotes there, just like we would put dot .hi in our CSS here. And so that's going to go through my DOM here of my HTML, and it's going to find the first element, right? The query selector, it's going to find the first element that has this particular class of hi. Right? If I was just looking for H1, I could do H1. If I was looking for something with an ID, I could do hashtag whatever ID it was called, right? Because that's how we look up IDs in CSS. But in this case, since we use the class, we just put .hi because that's the way we look it up in CSS. Now, it is if you have multiple, if you're using multiple classes or multiple elements on a page, right? We're only going to say multiple classes or multiple elements because we know that we should only use one. We know that we should only use one particular ID on a page. But if we're using multiple of the same type of classes or elements, it's only going to return the first one that it finds. When we get in advanced classes, we talk about query selector all, where it can return all of them, but we have to do something special to be able to work with those. And so from here, we can add .inner HTML. HTML there being in all caps, inner being in all lowercase. And we're going to set that equal to the text that we want to put inside of this H1. So in this case, it's going to be, in quotes, hello, comma, and then we can concatenate, just like we were doing in Python way back when, the username that we get from the prompt. And that'll put that in there as a heading on our site. So we can run this, and we can refresh this now. So now we can add our text here. Add text. What is your name? Mr. Ramsey, let's say. We click OK, and it adds hello, Mr. Ramsey to our site dynamically. If we were to put in a different name, like Alan, it would change that. It would have hello, Alan. Right, our click me button up here still says hello world when we click that. We can change that. And it's going to change it to be whatever we put in there. So that means this week we have covered the click event, functions, prompts, and adding text to an element. Right? Because another thing that I could do, right? If I just wanted to add text to a page, if I didn't want to do something like this, we could do something like we did earlier, where it would happen at the onset, right? Where I just called the function. And so I could just do document.querySelector hi enter HTML, right? We could just do that. It would just call that function, and it would just be on the page when the page loads. So that is an option, right? Something to think about. So with that being said, that's where we'll stop for today. We got a lot covered today. That means next week we'll do a little bit of review. We will cover changing styles with CSS, or not with CSS, with JavaScript. And we will cover doing a mouse over image changer. And that will be it for JavaScript, I believe. I believe we'll have covered everything at that point. So that's all that I have for you for today. We'll turn the music back on for just a couple minutes, just in case anybody watching live has any questions. If you're watching the recording and you have any questions, please please send me a Teams message or an email, and we will do our best to get them answered. But again, that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.